Hi, welcome to India Chapter webinar. Today's presenters will be myself, Vinu Jade. I'm also the ambassador and the chapter lead for India Chapter, and my colleague Anil Prasad. Unfortunately, he has not yet joined, and he should be expected to join any soon. So let's begin today's agenda, which is in terms of evaluating what's the value of an IT strategy in high-tech industry. High-tech industry is moving forward in the present decade in a very fast-paced manner, and is challenging in terms of the high technology deliverables that are coming out to the end customers. And the challenge is actually in terms of not just enabling the necessities of high-tech industry, but also making sure that they progress further to get value benefits to the customer. If you recall, in other core industries, the earlier theme in IT, the information technology, was to support. In the past decade, it has moved forward from a support paradigm to mostly enabling technology for business purposes. In terms of high-tech industry, which is unique by itself, we will look at it a little bit further today. The high-tech industry needs technology not only to just support and enable, but also ensure that they can grow in competitive market in terms of strategy to the business itself. In other core industries, the business strategy is more in terms of the actual customer product relationships with not much of technology to say, but here in high-tech industry, it's per se a technology enablement beyond the depth and width of information technology. So let's begin with and just look at some of the scenarios that we have in the high-tech today. Now, if you look at the approach today in the objective today for the seminar, webinar, is how the case studies can be shared across amongst us in terms of a value-driven enterprise architecture coming into fore and bringing in some kind of improvement in terms of where the business becomes more competitive, more market-driven, more customer experience-driven functionalities and capabilities. So the steps I have listed out, some of them which we will follow through in our case study, is first understanding what is the strategic imperatives of the organization, in high-tech organization. So do we get value through strategic planning there? So you do a kind of strategic planning which brings in for the strategic imperatives, the must-dos, which we should be able to manage to not only enable but also take it further by technologies that we have, including that of information technology. The second step basically is to look at what kind of value we bring in to the business by identifying certain capability areas within the business strategy. The basic objective is that down below there are certain things which we need to actually define and design, where it cannot be, which cannot be measured in terms of the value-driven enterprise. So we need to do a constructive model which defines the value capability areas. So the third step comes in modeling the business itself. Now these three steps, most of the scenario we find business taking more interest and coming forward, and they do it within their center of excellences and their divisions and departments, where IT is only listening or probably auditing to understand what are those capability areas that will help their strategic planning. And then at the business model level, they get involved along with the business to actually define the domain and processes. So this clearly gives a perspective in our case study as to first look at strategic imperatives, look at those capability areas within the strategic planning to address, doing it modeling of the particular domain and processes involved, and then looking at how the operating model does. So far we have been, the first 3 steps more of strategy. So we are more on strategy rather than actual operations. So when you come into IT implementation, it needs to actually adopt the operating model that is defined for the business value. So that's the 4th step. And ultimately what we are looking at is designing an IT strategy or defining an IT strategy for meeting those capabilities, models and imperatives that we have identified from the business and its strategy planning. Of course, as we implement the operating model, we will need a kind of management monitoring which will be more of IT applications, the risks involved, be it operating risk or others, and a governance using the enterprise architecture, COBIT or IT framework. So this is in just what all we will go through today in our case study. In couple of cases as applied to high-tech industry. So we will try and bring in a value measurement to the kind of enterprise architecture that we provide for its operations. So that's the focus. If you just look at a couple of years back or earlier in the decade, enterprise architecture was more in just defining a concept and then leaving it for the implementation specialists. Now came a scenario where not only the concept and design but also the way to implement. And today, as you look at today's scenario, we are not only looking at just concept, design, as well as implement, but also to monitor and control. So that's the expanse of the enterprise architecture with of its implementation areas. So going further, we have in high technology industry a couple of segments. Of course, in most of that we have either products or services. But the kind of products vary phenomenally different. There are complex equipment, there are semiconductors, there are consumer electronics, there might be contract manufacturing as well. And they vary in terms of supply chain, in terms of the customers that we expect to meet these products going to, the mechanism, the processes and the domain. There might be certain similarities in terms of the overall model, the business model in some areas, but it differs in processes and in terms of implementing or executing certain strategic imperatives needed. For example, the complex equipment or a consumer electronics, if you look at it, we will have in consumer electronics certain things that consumers take away and then they use at their own isolated places, or they need support in terms of there is an issue. However, in complex equipment scenario, it is not so. It is always a real-time help that is essential for the use by the consumer, the particular product, in terms of day-to-day execution as well, because it's more real-time than compared to a mobile or a PDA not working in a particular day. So you have time span for products and consumer electronics to actually look at maintenance and support, whereas in terms of complex equipment, you will have no much time for a reaction. So the processes change in terms of these, so the differentiator comes such. In today's high-tech industry, we have more in terms of the supply and demand that are looked at. Many times the semiconductors per se might be used in many complex equipments. Consumer electronics might be used in some certain other scenarios in services, outsourced contract manufacturing as well. So there might be a combination of these high-tech industries in supply and demand model. Now if you go further, if you just look at the particular case study that we are trying to address today, if you look at the sorry, just hold on 1 minute, please. Yeah. Were you able to see the screen change? No, just hold on. I think there was an issue in terms of some pop-up coming in. So today's interest of case study amongst those 4 areas which we saw as high-tech industry, we are looking at complex equipment value chain process and looking at their model areas. So as usual, we have certain source from which the silicon comes in, we have component manufacturing at its lowest level, then we have contract manufacturing, assembly levels, and then it comes into the OEMs. So we have two tiered base. One is a supply base, the other is OEMs and sales and distribution. Of course, the customer is the third tier in terms of getting direct benefits or direct sales and service of the same. Of course, we have depicted the same in the OEM sales and distribution. However, there's a big gap or a big process involved in terms of the OEM sales and distribution meeting the end customer. So we have three-tiered approach in terms of the supply base, the sales distribution, and the customer. Now, if you look at most of the scenarios that we see today in any of the industries, we have customers and products. We are varying services coming in to meet the customer, or a customer agile or customer agility demanding more products coming into their form. It depends on the business strategy of the particular organization in high-tech industry or any other industry as to define what is their approach. Are they going to appease the customer, make the products which are as on demand by the customer on a timely or a periodic pattern, or they have fixed products for which the customer demand is always there, or they create certain necessities and economics and market wherein the customer comes to take their products which are quite fixed. Typical example might be Samsung and Apple. Apple has a limited number of products compared to Samsung in terms of variability of their models. So Samsung is more prepared in terms of changing the supply chain and creating more products to meet the customer, whereas Apple is more interested in doing higher research in terms of product improvement within the limited product space that they have, for which they expect the customer to come and buy because of certain high value associated with those fixed products. So with such subtle variations actually meaning a lot in terms of the financial or material supply chain coming to make a product which is offered to the customer, and the customer, by he or she herself, will have a bearing in terms of what the market or economic demands are, whether they are capable enough to afford it or not. So when the customer actually needs the product, that means to say that we have a mapping between the need and necessities, or the supply and demand mismatch is reduced. So depicting this scissor is actually looking at the gap between the financial supply chain and the economic market demand. If we reduce it, then obviously we expect the customer to meet the products, and the fulcrum being that of the enterprise architecture or the business strategy. In other words, at this point of time in the scissor, we have low business process effectiveness index or a low governance effectiveness. So there is a gap between the customer and product, and there is a supply and demand mismatch. That makes it that the technology should focus to bring agility to enable and support movement of the scissor, as well as the business focus to improve domain definitions and regulatory and governance failures. That will actually make the customer mapping to the product by improving the business process effectiveness index and improving the governance effectiveness. This is an analogy, a cutting paradigm that I'm trying to depict for one to understand very easily coming from a technology angle as to what a business is. Today, in the market, we have technology personnel who have very little exposure into what a business is, what is its strategy, though they themselves are end customers to such products and industries. We do own gadgets, we do travel, we do banking, and so on and so forth. However, when working as a technologist to support or enable these industries, we seem to forget the basic necessity of a business value towards which the technology per se has to work. So this scissor basically explains in simplicity a depiction of an industry where customer and products are mapped to one another through technology focus as well as business focus. Having gone through this exercise, let's come back into our case study and try to define the strategic imperatives. Now basically I have tried to list only 3 or 4 of them, primarily in terms of its design complexity or the variation in supply or in variation in service. And of course, to make those supply and service map, we need to look at some kind of a configuration management wherein we manage and improve better. So these are strategically very important in terms of executing the business strategy of a high-tech complex equipment industry. So the design complexity definitely is a very important imperative. How complex or how difficult is the design or the end product? And is it so specific that every product of yours, let's say extreme side of it, every product of yours needs customization, customer specific elements in it. For example, if you are looking at a particular product, particular product which is per se being used in the measurement or a test or a fabricator equipment which is in itself a niche value, we need to look at how best the product that we are offering meets that requirement. So there is no commonality between 2 products that we sell. So it is a very highly complex design requirement. And as the existing designs be used to reduce such complexity, it only depends on the maturity of the organization in complex equipment industry. So this is one of the worst case, which will actually make sure that every new product that you make has a new element or a multiple new element in it, except for a little foundation design within it. Now the rest of the other 2 things, supply or service, depend upon your vendors and your customers. So obviously it is more of a sales supply chain vulnerability that the industry has, which is quite common in terms of other industries as well. So the kind of imperatives that you are trying to focus here will be, can I fully leverage a global manufacturing and supply base, or should I have to go for a specific geography? It's an imperative that if I decide that, okay, I go with a global manufacturing and a supply base, then the processes and the modeling will be totally different from that of a distributed supply. Similarly, in terms of service delivery, how can you transfer my service operations to a profitable business is quite a common issue that every industry CTO and CEO ponder. However, how can you actually qualify those service operations in terms of giving high quality services performed by your vendors or your partners, actually make your service delivery more competent? So you may bring in vendors and partners together to actually service deliver. If you own it up yourself, your processes will be different from that of bringing partnership or using geography-specific delivery capabilities. A typical example that I can bring analogy is in information technology itself. We have the offshore on-site model that we very often use. At on-site, we can do certain conceptualization, we can do some of the coding, some programming. However, we have to be, more clear in terms of volume-driven projects. We can do it offshore, so that the cost comes down. There is a kind of profitability that can be achieved in this particular way. So that is how you look at service delivery. So each one of those factors really change the way your process and domain is. So these strategic imperatives really lead us into a kind of four most important requirements. One is we should have an approach and methodology for business strategy. Do we have one for modeling? Do we have for defining the agility of our infrastructure or not? It all depends upon whether we do strategic planning or not. More often than not, any industry which is profitable today has a very high focus in terms of strategic planning. It might be focused on some of the business guys, the CFO, CEO, heads of different divisions sitting together, hardly an information technology per se involvement. However, of late, there has been in high-tech a movement wherein IT industry is taking part in strategic planning, and that's because they are able to provide the direct inputs to those business strategists as to how well they can adopt to a different way of delivering or achieving a particular strategy. For example, meeting a customer. A typical example is that of an iPad in an insurance sector. iPad has come so much to the front today that agents no longer sit in their offices. They carry an iPad, meet the customers, and fill in their orders, their details, everything on the fly in real time. And that has changed the way the insurance business is today in the global market. So similar to that, even in high-tech industry, we have those technology enablers or competitive edges that will bring a different flavor to the business strategy that the organization can adopt. So it's very important to have value through strategic planning, as well as what we discussed in the last couple of minutes in terms of improving the supply and demand, improving how we meet the agile customer experience. And that requires definitive qualitative domain modeling. And last but not the least, in terms of process modeling, that's something which is very important in terms of the flow of events, activities in the supply chain as well as within your organization, and reduce the governance and process gap, which will make sure that the products that you are actually strategizing to sell to the customer meet the customer requirement. So that particular process modeling is more of operational rather than that of a domain which is more strategic. Unless you have a strategic domain modeling, you may not be able to successfully do a logical process modeling. So, that's a big statement. Many people feel that process may also be strategic in nature, but according to my opinion, process definition depends upon maybe it is a fixed process or an agile process. It comes in after you define your domains and those domains which are defined by your strategic planning. So the normal flow of events is more of strategy coming in domain areas, and then you don't do much changes to your domain once you strategize for it. And once you start operating, your processes may change because of the customer and the products varying. Okay, so that's my point of view. Now for all this, either to support or enable, sustain or succeed in all the top three with an agile technology, do we need to adopt enterprise architecture methodologies, or is it okay to do with just a governance model and go with component-based engineering which are unrelated to one another? Now that's a question that will actually help you define how closer or how the value that you bring to the business in terms of defining an architecture for the organization for the delivery of these things. The strategic imperatives, according to my point of view, are met very closely if you adopt a certain methodology, and more so in terms of what I spoke and introduced to you in terms of a specific domain and a process model, enlisting capabilities, mapping different applications or IT applications which cater to these capabilities, looking at them in an integrated fashion, a holistic pattern, which is what enterprise architecture provides you with, will make you more value-driven than going component-wise. So let's see how the case study goes through. These are the 4 terms that you will constantly view in this particular case study. Value through strategic planning, qualitative domain modeling, logical process modeling, and how to adopt enterprise architecture. Now, if you have heard me, we have been talking about strategy, and we are coming to a second level where there might be certain changes needed in business to meet these strategic imperatives. And that's a strategic plan. And how do you define them? You define with reference to capabilities that are needed. Say, for example, outsourcing with complete visibility across multiple tires, or emergence of a customer service as a strategic differentiator. For example, your competitive market may not be just looking at effective customer service. They might be disillusioned. So emergence of such a real-time customer service is a strategic differentiator. So this, you may have to change the business way you look at it. You may have to improve your customer service organization, the way they do things. Even outsourcing with complete visibility across multiple tires is a new cup of tea for most of the organizations. You know, outsourcing always comes with apprehensions that you may lose control. But it's actually more beneficial if you outsource to the right course niche industries which are focused on specific deliverables. It improves the efficiency, it improves the time to market. So this may change the way your own business is today. Similarly, we have the processes. We may have certain organizational common areas of waste, okay? And specific to each of the department, there might be certain things that are needed as lean initiatives across it. So you need to take up in individual divisions what is specifically needed and what is common areas of waste across most of this. So that is the capability to address these things. It may not be the information technology addressing these changes. It might be that it's only supporting. It may have to provide some automated way of doing it. It may have to suggest remedial measures, solutioning, a different kind of a process which will be able to run real time or at a required time to reduce, let us say, high material and supply costs. How often do you check your supply costs? You may do it once in a quarter. Is it sufficient enough? And if it is not so, then you need to make it more real time, more often. And for that you need to get it automated. So you may have to go in for applications that can do a check on the supply of cost. Or you might be getting a duplicate or erroneous data coming from different sources. Is it redundancy? Or have you done domain modeling correctly? So the waste can be reduced in terms of implementing right technology approach in each one of these common areas as well as improving in specific divisions. So one is the capabilities of the change in business. Each one of those bullet points here may actually lead to multiple process changes. So you should be very conscious at the business tire as to say, okay, if we have out of these 5, are we focusing on only emergence of customer service today in the first stage? Are we doing simultaneous optimization or both? Because impact is tremendous. Once you take multiple bullets here, you will have 5 sets of similar things in changes of the process and process capabilities. So one should be cautious in terms of selective business value-driven approach where you take up a specific strategic imperative as to improving the customer service as a strategic differentiator and adopting process changes to them. Now, if you look at more from the IT angle, more in the way the case study today we are going now, how often do you find these changes happening? Strategy purposes changing, your competitive advantages changing, you have external and internal impacts, you have an advantage because of a failure of a competitor, or you have a disadvantage because of the success of a competitor. Now, these things define when you do a transformation. It might be to strategize from the business angle. For example, I'm going regional. I will be able to cater to multiple geographies with a common control, with specific local advantages. So it's a strategy execution, in which case your business strategy number one will direct your IT strategy and define your application portfolio for IT architecture. Application, data, infrastructure as IT. So it's a strategy execution. Whereas if you're looking at an IT transformation, you actually map the business strategy with the business architecture, because you have multiple business divisions, very unhappy with your IT, not able to provide value. So what we try to do is you map the business strategy with that of the architecture that is there, change business architecture, and then define IT architecture. So these are the four pillars that we very often look at, whether it is a business strategy as a driver or as IT strategy as an enabler. Now in the second part, the IT strategy as an enabler, it's more in terms of operationalism. It's a CIO-driven exercise. It's not a CTO-driven. The competitive potential, which is basically looking at how able you are in technology, in information technology, to deliver something, is need to be mapped with your business strategy. Yes, I think I can do better. So you change your business strategy because of your capability to deliver in those areas, and then define and goes in a loop in terms of IT strategy as an enabler. It is a competitive potential. You have something in yourself which you want to ensure the business makes use of. That's a competitive potential. So that's driven by the CIO saying, look, in a bank or in a similar surrounding as a financial organization, look, I have an application which can contact customers on mobile. Why can't we use it? So it's IT-enabled business strategy. Okay. So similar to that, we have service level, wherein operationalism comes in more core, where the business architecture actually drives directly the IT architecture to define a cloud strategy, for example, to go on the cloud. Now, that's all founded by the business architecture. You don't go back to the business strategy level. You already have an existing business architecture which is serving you very well. However, your strategy to actually host on cloud or host applications on cloud or make use of outsourcing for service delivery, now that is a 3-4 strategy purpose. So today we are looking at our case study, which is more in terms of strategy execution, which is business strategy, translating it into IT strategy, deriving our infrastructure IT out of that need and necessities, looking at its value mapping with that of the business need. So having said that, the derived IT strategies will look like this. The IT strategy defines, let's establish and sustain a profitable innovation. I mean, they are very ambiguous statements in an IT strategy by definition. Enable lean or agile supply networks. Manage and grow a profitable service business. Now, once you have this kind of, each one of these IT strategy bullet, you have a repercussion in terms of your partners, your vendors, and the way you deliver stuff. Deliver service delivery, or in terms of support in supply chain. You will have multiple changes, and that reflects not just in domain, but also in your processes. Every domain change necessitates multiple process changes, as I spoke earlier. So when you say, I want to look at, let's say, manage and grow a profitable service business, it might involve going in for a cloud hosting. And once you go for the cloud hosting, you may have to look at how different it is for your applications, your data, your infrastructure, which are managed today, versus that of what it will be tomorrow. So the IT strategy goes in depth into each one of these points and define them for execution purposes in terms of an operational model. So today here we are in the business model, which defines what IT strategy should be, and based on that, we define the capability continuum, or more necessarily, the operational model. go into one specific process modeling example. Multi-tier supply chain planning web, a process model. So here at this point of time, we have defined the strategic imperative being, say, we go for a customer and your organization doing certain things, you're using a supply chain mechanism for getting the semicon supplier to meet the requirements of the product. Now, how varied, how extensible visibility to multiple tiers will be there? How do you manage multiple tiers? How fast you can react to suppliers' constraint? How can you improve and reduce the obsolescence of the materials? Reduce how non-value-added costs and exception order because multiple tiers are there. What are the infrastructural necessities? So this is strategic planning. Having said that we go for a multi-tier supply chain planning, which is a strategic imperative, you need to define a process for that. And the domains are your supplier and your customer and yourself. How do you go with your processes? So now, this is a typical example of where you get involved as an information technology specialist who knows how to do process modeling, sit with the business specialist and look at the scenarios, exceptions, and then formulate a plan, a strategic plan, which will actually lead to defining domains. Say, for example, demand is a domain. Supply is a domain at a very high level. Now, if you're looking at supply forecast, it is a sub-part of the domain that we are calling. So, do we have those necessities? Do we really need a focus in terms of that particular domain? Does multiple processes use that particular domain? So, these are the things that go very well in the strategic planning. And ultimately, the focus will be to synchronize plans across multiple tiers to reduce lead times. So that's the focus, that's the value. How much lead time have you reduced by implementing a new process? That's the KPI. So this is how in a typical multi-tier supply chain planning, we do a domain and process model integration. You look at products, you look at different kinds of assembly, you look at a sub-assembly and coming out in terms of finished products coming through different tiers. It may depend upon the quantities, it may depend upon the optional assemblies, it may also depend upon the capability of your supplier. Does he have almost finished product or a component level? What component level it is? So, and then how do you manage inventory across? And now, if you have analysis tools to determine certain things, you will be able to meet the demand faster, better, optimize better. Your risks will be reduced. Now, how do you do that analysis? Unless you have a domain definition of what are those finished products are, what are the assemblies, what are the components, what are its restrictions, what is pooling, how do you do optimization. These are all things that you define. And how do you interrelate them in a process? What event happens and what activity follows each is a process across the domain. So this is where the supply chain planning is effective in terms of qualitative output as to by a change in the domain or a process, you're able to get value of reducing what we spoke earlier in terms of lead times and efficiency in the processes as well. Improving the processes. Many times there has been questions, especially some of these high-tech industries, that today an existing process is good enough. It does deliver. However, the performance is not up to standard. Now, if you improve the performance, the next level will be, oh well, I could have actually done a little bit more to appease the customer and satisfaction level improve. So there will be additional activity or an additional event which comes in wherein you need to do optimization of the processes. So this is a very continuing process, and that's why I mentioned continuum for capabilities is something which one should be conscious of. At what level you actually generate value out of the changes to the process or changes to the domain as applicable. That is a caution point here, because as and when you tend to reduce the amount of time it takes or improve the efficiency, the next day or the next hour there will be a requirement to additionally add events or activities or bring two tires again synchronized with additional activities and additional overheads, or directed towards a better customer quality, the quality of the product, or meeting a particular customer appeasement. For example, the customer has the product and over a period of time we assess that there was a specific problem that if we can improve during our processing at sub-assembly, it can be eliminated. So the sub-assembly processes change, and obviously we need to have the processes very agile to meet this end customer demand or end finished product KPI. Now the second case is more in terms of cost-effective production. Now we are not looking at any other, so when you say cost-effective, it doesn't mean it has to be high performance. So that's very important here. Ultimately, your divisional head or other person may say, look, I want it cost-effective as well as efficient. Now that's a different scenario altogether. Flow manufacturing for cost-effective production is a specific capability that you are trying to model in a process. You do not need to mix up, in terms of what we spoke earlier in terms of performance improvement, optimization in the second case study that we are looking at. The cost effectiveness of the production may have certain elements. You have to make reusability, ensuring that the inventory is always up on time, the feeder plant live, the feeder line is satisfactory, and the suppliers actually give you at the right time the right thing. And the customers are expected to take delivery of the sequence to demand. So it's a lean thing which you are defining in terms of a logical process, more in the Toyota model. It's first time, meet the objectives, have a very well streamlined event happening, and you will look at more of lean practices, best practices in this particular case. But how does enterprise architecture come in here? Here we are at that one step of enterprise architecting where out of a strategic imperative, a very important business value, we have taken up at a particular domain and looking at specific process for improving the cost. That is an enterprise architecture theme here. To do that enterprise architecture work is various approaches. Frameworks are there. There are bottoms-up approaches, a top-down approach. There are various frameworks, and there are multiple methodologies which you can adopt. One of them is what I am speaking today. So, enterprise architecture is not just IT. It starts from business, it ends in business by evaluating what they have done and ensures that the technology maps it. So let's go in further and look at this manufacturing logistic integration, which will actually improve the cost effectiveness. This is the second step of the logical process modeling. So the sales order, the manufacturing operations, and the warehouse. Now if you have a warehouse management where you need to look at, that's a cross point, it's actually integration point, where you manufacture and place them, and then based on the sales it goes out. So obviously your processes has to be very closely knitted. The guys who are sitting at warehouse are looking at two sides. One is things coming into the warehouse, they don't have place to keep them. The other is the sales order, the wrong things are coming into the warehouse, whereas the right things are not coming in. And the sales orders are not mapping with the warehouse stock. Now this is how the typical supply and demand gaps happen. There's no planning, if there's no planning. So we look at efficiently move products from assembly to customers with a single theme. Or when there is a sales order, there is a projection, and based on that there's manufacturing operations. So there's a lean in WMS. So it basically has very little time in terms of cost effectiveness, efficiently moving products from one end to the other. It also deals with more of the transportation management. These are all technologies which is beyond information IT scenario. However, it's very important that for every activity we have a support automated function which ensures that there is flow of information, and the flow of information happens through right processes. Now if you have wrong information to the right hand, unfortunately the process doesn't work. And that is what is exactly happening today in most of the industries, is that we have excellent information but at wrong hand. And the person who is trying to look at it, he has not got the right information. So what ultimately happens is a huge analytics, a kind of big data exercise, wherein everybody can access every kind of information, which is overheads. So if you have to be effective in terms of a right information to the right person, your processes and domain definition should be perfect, should be ideal, and should be also agile to accommodate your strategic purpose. That's where this comes in terms of whether it is warehouse management or is it sales order management. It all comes to the final conclusion that unless you have a planning done, a domain defined, and a process of integration related activities or specifically identified to meet the business value, no application, come what may, SAP or Oracle or name it or whatnot, will be able to meet the expectation of the business value. And that's what at the end it's happening these days. Many times we feel that SAP or Oracle is good enough to meet, because yes, they must be having holistic functionalities and capabilities, whereas our industry may need only about 50-60% of it. But you'll find it very, very interesting that most of these products also do not have specific organizational processes in it. And you need to customize. Just like the scenario that we spoke of, the products need to customize to a large extent to the customer need. So all this comes in again back to the same picture as to, did your organization business strategists sit together, do a process and domain model, hand out the capabilities list based on which you identified the application capabilities to be mapped or not. And that's the enterprise architecture job. So even in any of these case studies that we are looking at it, the value to strategic planning is very important, which will meet. This is one more typical example in terms of automatically verifying entitlements. Now you need to define certain service coverage areas. You need to look at the types of services, whether it's warranties, extended warranties. Unfortunately, because of the industry competitiveness, every organization wants to weigh with the other in providing customer benefits. So that changes the processes, increases the demand within the internal processes. It may be an extension of the existing process, but with a specific addition or a feature in it. The third point is also the bills. Okay, how regular it is, how is it based on usage per volume per incident? How is your service contract repositories working? Does it cover the coverage times, the response times or not? Now these are all come through, unless you define in the domain a capability for coverage time, of storing response time, of being able to relate discounts with a particular service, or a domain definition which says a resource is mapped with this kind of a service, you will be unable to meet the service contract's KPI. So it is very mandatory to have a domain definition and a process which goes through in each one of them. The The other area which is, we have been talking more on the domain modeling or the process modeling, but the heart of heart requirement is actually your data. Of course, most of us know that the information that we have been speaking is there already as a data, but then how effective is your data modeling to meet the process? Are you able to store the process cache to such an extent that redundancy can be eliminated, a similar process can be automated, or is it that every time a process is run, it is just cached for a few seconds or transaction caching? So these are the definitions within the process data as well as the data that they process. So there are two sets to it in terms of what data moves in the process, and as data moves in the process, what are the process requirements and process definitions are. So that's the qualitative domain modeling variant here, which deals more on the data dimensions and help you in ultimately the analytics and the business intelligence aspects, as we will cover a little bit later. Just hold on 1 minute, please. So coming back to the domain modeling, each one of these areas may have a common product repository. The design specs, the BOM, the quality of the data, the warehouse packaging, sales, ownership, the usage status, maintenance and service history as applicable to a common product repository of the organization. And how do you actually define a product repository? How do you record manufacturing, quality and maintenance specifications? How do you track the status and history of changes? What depth do you track them? Okay, and how do you have a maintained bill of material or you just manage configurations? Now bill of materials may be a variant based on the product and services that are bundled or specific to a product. How do you bundle them? And last but not the least, the track depreciation and accounting information, because that's a very important value addition to the end customer, and your own profitability. What profitability you actually come out of this process is, of course, tracked through depreciation and accounting. So do you enable them? Does your product that you have, the application or the information technology application which you have chosen, meet these requirements, or is it customized to your need? So these are the things that will come forward once you actually do a modeling of the data dimensions specific to your domain or a process. Only then can you go out in the market or your homegrown application development or mapping, without which you will actually buy something which may not be exactly mapping with your requirement. So when you're coming down from capabilities, today we are talking at the capability styles. Enterprise architecture is more at the capability tier. And when you go actually into requirement, each of these capabilities have n amount of requirements which are provisioned in multiple information technology products which will help them. We call them applications, we call them data dimensions, we call them data sets like in IBM or in SAP. So the meeting them or not depends fully in terms of how effective your IT strategy was in mapping to the business dimensions. So there's one more similar area. I will go a little bit faster in terms of the field service resource planning. This is a typical example. Oh, sorry, I think there has been a pass on the screen. Okay. I will do it on top of this. Just hold on a minute, please. something which is technical. I'm unable to share the screen, but I will continue just a couple of more minutes in terms of winding it up. So if you look at, we have to have a common data model to meet the domain and process requirement and associated business intelligence definitions. And overall, if you look at the requirement of the enterprise architecture capability continuum, the EA focus is more in terms of strategy and less detailed. Whereas in terms of the solution architecture, it is more detailed at the operational level than at the strategic level. So the domain architecture falls as a purview of the enterprise architecture. So I hope that today's presentation was interesting, except for the last couple of slides I was unable to share with you due to technical problem. Please pardon me for the same, and I expect you to give me some inputs. This will be available online at YouTube, as I will enable the same. And thank you very much for your participation, and have a very good day. Thank you. I will browse through a couple of slides that we have missed if people have some time to go through. We were looking at some of the scenarios for value through strategic planning, and then we arrived at qualitative domain modeling, how well the field service resource planning can be improved with logical processes, and meeting priorities, cost, travel time, distance, and also look at deployment options where the processes will definitely define the efficiency and the performance of the need better. Managing product returns, which will be more in terms of the complete logistics and repair processing needs in the model, which will focus on monitoring the return of damaged and serviceable products, track repair status and actual costs, which is a very important business value. Now, the more effective our implementation is in this, it's that much good in terms of a process definition or a domain definition for the same for architecting. Last but not the least, of course, is the installed base preventive maintenance. So you can see that the extent of the business strategy and the imperatives is not limited to just design of technology core processes, but also in terms of maintenance, support, serviceability, and they all involve processes across multiple domain areas. So if you're looking at a data model which maps in, we will have, as I said, in our scissors cutting edge paradigm, customers meeting the products being enabled by suppliers, and multiple domains such as manufacturing, order management, sales and marketing, HR finance, which might be supportive, planning and purchasing, which will be very active, proactive, product development, which will be very reactive to the market and also agile customer experience, and then looking at sales and marketing, which is aggressive and competitive. So these are some of the things that the data model can define within the domain, and with the data model foundation, if you have a domain defined, you will have processes going across manufacturing, planning and purchasing, and product development or order management, cutting across the domain areas. So further, we have a business intelligence definition, which is a more of a value in terms of how decisions are taken to make it, how agile is your product and service delivery, how much design changes, what planning exceptions that you need, and how much on-time delivery you have been able to meet, production resources mapping. These will all improve your processes if it goes to the right people, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of whom does it reach at what time of the process within what domain. And that's what is architecting. It's not simply bringing an application which has got a supply chain functionality, but we are looking at more of defining capabilities mapped to these requirements and functionalities, which will make it more of a business value. Lastly but not least, in terms of having so far designed and implemented scenarios of processes and domain in this case study, we have to look at how do we govern them. What visibility and control and what efficiency does it have? Do we have KPIs to ensure that a next level of strategic decision should be taken for change in our processes? Does our strategy work or not? Does the strategic imperatives are met? Have you met the business values? So these are some of the things that come very fore in terms of governance, and there are tools today in the market which do across enterprise architecture, GRC, and application portfolio management. And this gives you a complete control from conceptualization to monitoring level, a single picture of what's working, what's old, what's obsolete, what's your value that you're giving to the organization of an architected solution. So that is where today enterprise architecture is. So we have innovation at system level, we have a definition of differentiating factors that we look at it, and codify the systems of record. So these encompass the IT cost and business value realignment, and definitely application portfolio management as a part of the architecting comes very much forward in this. So this is an example of a business model canvas. I was talking earlier in terms of value through strategic planning, and they may go across multiple tiers as we saw in this example of complex event management, wherein you have certain cost structure and revenue flows actually controlling the key resources and the client segments. So how do you map it to an ARPA which maps both things? So today, going through this case study, we are able to appreciate business process and domain modeling as a foundation for architecting, and also perceive how business and technology strategy integrate to give directions to formulate next generation architecture. Now beyond that, we have also gone through a business model which defines what needs to be done, an operating model of how we achieve it through process and decision, structure, plus governance model, and also each of these business model will have corresponding operating model type. So we need to be conscious as to when we do strategic planning, how much impact we will have within and beyond the organization. A lot of analysis has happened in the past few years in terms of architectural maturity of organization. This you will find it on web as well. MIT research showing relationship between high-performing companies and mature enterprise architecture practices. The key characteristics that they looked at was in terms of local and functional optimization. There has been high business silo. Standardizing technology and IT efficiency has been hyped and has been working quite well, but the optimized core in operational efficiency is very important. Beyond all, high performance companies, they look at componentization, focus on reusable application and process components. That is a high level of investment practices, and obviously one which follow a niche model for a particular value that you're providing to the organization and customer. If that is met with very few applications, the rest of the things you can just junk it up. There is no need for a legacy there, because today's strategy of having a product doing 80% of your revenue is good enough. So that kind of a scenario is achieved. Organization is able to perceive much before and envision what product lineup changes can need or needed within the organization based on the very mature enterprise architecture methodology. Now this is what I was explaining a couple of minutes earlier in terms of the width and breadth of enterprise architecture, more at the decision level where it is, and use it. Enterprise architecture and domain architecture for more strategic, solution architecture is more operational and more detailed, specific to certain domains, not cross-domain. but specific to certain processes which are cross-domain. So let's be very clear, solution architecture is more of a domain definition, but encapsulating certain processes within those domains or between a couple of domains. Whereas enterprise architecture is more of strategic consideration, it has a business model as a foundation, strategic imperatives as a value-driven enterprise need, and scenarios that depict the capabilities, and a blueprint that will say how exactly your IT systems and your investment planning can meet those expectations and create a roadmap. And last but not the least is to provide a governance ability. Now, having completed most of the case study scenarios, we have actually learned from the case study 5 steps to success in adopting enterprise architecture. You first set business value through strategic planning. You define your capability continuum. You do a business model for it and provide an operating model canvas. Once you have an operating model canvas, you will be able to do domain and process modeling. Based on the domain modeling and process modeling, you will be able to identify applications, information delivery processes, and infrastructure needed to meet those boundaries. And you adopt enterprise architecture for the above, as also in terms of application portfolio management, and be able to measure how much of a set business value you have actually delivered by defining this particular year roadmap more easily. Thank you very much. Have a very nice day.